Animals have been around for millions of years, long before humans ever walked the earth. And today there's still so much to learn from how they live. Over the last decade, two researchers have closely observed the development and socialization of adolescent animals to find some answers as to why teens and young adults behave in certain ways.
I used to think before doing this study, I had this idea that in nature, animals went through puberty, which they do. And by the way, their puberty is remarkably similar to ours. Even dinosaur puberty is similar. We have a chapter called Jurassic puberty. But the point is, I used to think that animals went through puberty and then, boom, they were having sex.
That's Dr. Barbara Natterson-Horowitz, a professor of evolutionary biology and medicine at Harvard University and the University of California, Los Angeles. Natterson-Horowitz, along with co-author Catherine Bowers, wrote Wildhood, the epic journey from adolescence to adulthood in humans and other animals. The book highlights some of the similarities shared between these two species and how social media may have a lasting negative effect on human development.
In the wild, animal adolescents actually very often have not yet learned how to court. That is, they haven't learned the elaborate courtship rituals, and sometimes for social reasons they don't have enough dominance, let's say, or position in the group to get together with another animal. And so in the case of adolescent albatross, it can take up to 4 years between the time that they hit puberty, that is, where their bodies could make offspring, and the time that they actually start having offspring. So that was real interesting and a big surprise to me, but it made complete sense because, gosh, when my son was 13, he was 6 feet tall, so he looked like a mature adult, but boy, was he not. And it turns out that's true across the animal kingdom as well.
Both Natterson-Horowitz and Bowers have spent the last 5 years traveling across the world to learn more about how different animal species experience adolescence. Through their findings, they discovered some similarities connecting human and animal parents together. For example, humans aren't the only ones sometimes welcoming their young adults back home after college or when life gets tough. Penguins, surprisingly, do it too.
Penguins, when they fledge, right, when that is when they, for the first time, when they jump into those icy waters off Antarctica and leave home, I just assumed that was it. But it turns out there are situations where they may return even after they've left home. So they're technically adults, that is, they're no longer chicks, but if there isn't enough food, they may actually come home and continue to get fed by their parents. It's called extended parental care, which was really interesting to learn how much flexibility there is in parenting adolescent animals across species.
Emily Ann Lilly is a board-certified veterinary behaviorist at the Ohio State University Veterinary Medical Center. She adds that this variation between species is vast, and it's important to note that each has a different way of handling their kin.
It depends a little bit on the social structure of the species. So some animals have very strong bonds to only their fathers, and they nurse from their moms, but otherwise they're not distressed by mom being away. And there are some New World monkeys that fall into that category, and that's very different from what we think about as sort of a nuclear family in humans. And there are critters who don't interact with their parents at all, right? So sea turtles. Their eggs get laid, and the group actually works together to dig themselves out, but they don't ever meet mom and dad. And then they range all the way from intensive care and following mom around for weeks to months or even years, and having a very prolonged juvenile period in some of the African mammals as well as some of the other hoofed mammals here in the United States. So like our horses, they're not really fully mature until a couple of years. So there's a huge range in the world of animals in terms of the amount and the type of interactions that they have with their parents, and how much is caregiving and how much is social learning and everything in between.
For example, she points to stallions, who typically experience a longer period of care compared to smaller species who have to fend for themselves almost immediately.
There's a bit of variability to that among each individual as well as within species. So, for example, horses, the stallions may go off and form bachelor groups, which sounds awful lot like a fraternity when you start looking at some of the behaviors that they exhibit. And the weaning is much more gradual than sudden, but there are certainly other species, and it's oftentimes species that replicate quickly. So rabbits, mice, those types of mammals, where as soon as they're done nursing and they're weaned, they are kicked out. And if they encounter those siblings or mom in the future, the encounter will actually be aggressive and agonistic rather than fraught with recognition and social bonding.
Life can be tough for some animals, but it's part of the natural socialization process for many species. Lily says that elephants in particular are interesting to observe because of their prolonged adolescent phase.
One of the more well-known ones is probably going to be elephants. They engage in a lot of care, both with their young as well as in their family group. They will do demonstrative learning. They will push their young in and out of troublesome places. They will dig out holes underneath their feet to help them get up. And they have a very prolonged juvenile period. It's years. And they're not even sexually mature until usually around their first decade. And they stay with their maternal group very frequently, so they have a lot of maternal care.
The animal kingdom is a fast-paced and dangerous place, probably more precarious than the human world in most instances. But both environments require their young to take risks in order to learn. Natterson Horowitz says taking these steps can be scary for a parent to watch, but is a vital part of an adolescent's understanding of fear and risk before becoming an adult.
We know that adolescents take risks, human adolescents. I worried about that a lot when my kids were young. All I was hearing about were accidents. And it turns out wild animal adolescents take risks too. And the reasons for that, if you'd asked me before I did the study, I'm a physician, I would have said, well, it's the adolescent brain. It's the teenage brain. And that's right. But the larger question is, well, why is the brain that way? And one of the things that we found is that adolescent gazelle sometimes actually approach their predators. Adolescent meerkat also do the same thing. Adolescent bats do the same thing. And the reason they're approaching their predators is to learn about them. They're smelling them. They're watching them. They do it in groups because there's safety in numbers. But having that perspective makes me think a little bit differently about some of the things that our teenagers do and what the underlying purpose of it may be.
And in the animal world, if you don't grasp these lessons fast, the consequences are much more dire.
It showed us that being inexperienced and particularly being what wildlife biologists call predator naive is not a good thing. It puts you in danger. And even though you want to make sure that you stay safe as an adolescent, you also need to gain experience with the most dangerous things you're going to face as an adult. The most powerful thing that can happen for an animal adolescent in terms of learning about danger is a near-miss experience. But that's a risky strategy. You don't want to learn that way because that's very high-stakes gambling.
Adulthood in the animal kingdom means surviving from one day to the next. That's why it's so important to stick with the pack. Greater numbers mean a greater ability to take risks in order to find food, water, and shelter. Natterson Horowitz says this mentality can also be applied to teenagers, who tend to take more risks among their peers. There's a sense of safety and comfort found in groups which reduces feelings of fear and increases adrenaline. But she says that online, it's a different story. The constant comparison of status and the popularity hierarchy present on social media platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook creates a temporary rush, but can lead to teenagers feeling perpetually anxious, depressed, and even addicted to social media.
Social media is comparison on steroids. And by the way, it's the kind of comparison where most of the time you lose. And we know that the more time adolescents spend on social media, the more depressed they get. So what's a parent supposed to do with that information? Well, one approach that comes really from studying adolescents in nature is to try to simulate a more natural situation. In the wild animal adolescents will be compared to each other through contests periodically. But in modern human life, it's just incessant, right? You go to school and you're being compared on your academic performance and then athletically and then your looks when you walk down the hall or you go in the cafeteria. But then you try to get a break from it and boom, you go to your phone and all of a sudden you're comparing how many followers somebody in your class has, et cetera, et cetera.
So what should parents do to help? Natterson Horowitz says encouraging a reduction in use or a complete break from social media can be a good thing.
Our brains evolved, the animal brain, and we have an animal brain, evolved to have some comparison. But what we have now is a mismatch. That is, there's just this constant tsunami of unrelenting comparisons. So we think that a status sanctuary, which it looks more like what a wild animal adolescent would experience, which is some assessment and some comparison, but gosh, not all the time. That every animal adolescent, including the ones in our homes, need a break from all that comparison.
It's also important to encourage teens to take that time that's not spent online and put it towards a hobby or an interest that they've lost touch with.
Spend time developing skills, whether it's musical ability or political interest or whatever it is, and get good at something that they're good at, that they like. In life, there are going to always be hierarchies. The key is when you become an adult and you graduate from high school, you get to start choosing your own hierarchies, your own groups, and where maybe the comparisons are a little more favorable.
To find out more about this topic and our guests, Dr. Barbara Natterson Horowitz and Emily Ann Lilly, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can also find out more about the new book, Wildhood, The Epic Journey from Adolescence to Adulthood in Humans and Other Animals, at wildhood.com. For more behind the scenes, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio, and subscribe and listen to our show anytime wherever you listen to podcasts. This segment is written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price.
About 27 million people in the United States have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. COPD is treatable, yet half of flare-ups are never reported to physicians, suggesting that patients are not seeking appropriate care. There are 1.2 million COPD hospital admissions each year, and 1 in 4 patients hospitalized for COPD flare-up die within a year. Dr. David Menino is a respiratory medical expert at GSK.
It is important to act before COPD progresses. Flare-up should be treated early on before the condition worsens. Having one COPD flare-up increases the risk of having another, and studies have shown each flare-up can cause more lung damage. You don't have to settle with symptoms that interfere with your daily routine. If you continue to experience COPD symptoms, speak with your doctor about what more can be done to manage them.
Dr. Menino says studies demonstrate that early treatment brings improvement in lung function, breathlessness, and quality of life. Find out more at COPD.com.
It's National Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month, as well as National Family Caregivers Month. The two go together since there are more than 16 million families and friends in the U.S. caring for someone with Alzheimer's. According to the Alzheimer's Association, 4 out of 5 caregivers say they'd like more support in providing care, especially from their families, yet 39% haven't engaged others in caregiving tasks. Ruth Drew, Director of Information and Support Services for the Alzheimer's Association, has suggestions on ways to help.
Make a standing appointment to give the caregiver a break so they can run errands or go to a support group. Caregivers often feel isolated or alone, so check in with a phone call or stop by for a visit. And when you offer support, be specific. Say, I'm going to the store, what do you need, rather than call me if you need anything.
People overwhelmingly agree caregiving for someone with Alzheimer's should be a group effort. Find more tips and resources for caregivers at alz.org.
Flu vaccinations are proven to prevent serious illness and reduce the risk of death from the flu in people with heart disease. Yet a new study shows nearly a third of adults with heart disease skip annual flu shots. The study, presented at the American Heart Association Scientific Sessions 2019, finds that 65% of uninsured low-income patients go unvaccinated. And even among those with insurance and a regular source of medical care, nearly 30% hadn't been vaccinated. Dr. Gautam Ramaharshagrandi of MedStar Health in Baltimore is the lead study author.
People with heart disease are at higher risk of medical complications and death from the flu. And an annual flu vaccination is inexpensive, easy, and proven to be effective. With the flu season upon us, we urge adults with heart disease to get their flu shot.
The annual flu vaccine is protective, and it can significantly reduce the risks of serious illnesses. The American Heart Association recommends all adults with heart disease to consult with your doctor to get a flu vaccine.
Thank you for listening to Viewpoints Radio, a production of Media Tracks Communications. If you enjoyed this broadcast, please support our show by subscribing, sharing it with a friend, and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find more Viewpoints stories on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and viewpointsonline.net. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio.
coming up on Viewpoints.
Identity theft is a crime where you are presumed guilty until you can prove yourself innocent.
The lifelong burden of one family's secrets. Then,
probably couldn't have got through college, much less medical school if it wasn't for music.
We speak with two doctors who turned their love for music into a second career. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.